Hi Bernhard, what are we
Ah,
talking about in this video?
so in this one, we are going to create the stretched cluster, right? So that's different from the previous series we did. So the stretched cluster creation is different and we'll show you the differences. But before we talk about that, you may wonder, or it's always a good practice to do a cluster validation first, right?
True.
Carsten has done this in this setup as well. However, we are not going to talk about this in detail. So we have run the tests, we fixed some issues, but we don't talk about it. If you're interested in what the cluster validation is, how it should look like, how it should be performed, get our voice about it, then go to watch video number 13 on the other series, right? And then come back to this one where we continue on doing the cluster setup. But before we do that, there is one difference between a stretch cluster setup and well, not one difference. There are many differences, but the one at this stage is with a regular cluster, you have a one cluster IP address. In this setup, in this stretched cluster, you do have two management networks, one on each side, right? It's having a different IP address
Mhm.
range, and therefore we also need a different IP address, which is valid on either on the first management network or on the other one, right? Because whoever owns the cluster role, right, if it's a node on odd side or on the even side, this IP address is made online, right? And we can't have a stretched IP address that works on both ends. We need to have an individual one on either network. So long story short, for a stretch cluster, we need two management IP addresses. Okay. And then I think, Carsten, we switch over to your system where you create the
Yes,
cluster using
yes,
PowerShell. And here you have the cluster validation, right? You did.
exactly. It run already. Yeah,
Mhm.
we have two warnings, software update levels, Defender updates are not equal, and something with the switch enable teaming. But this is also usual this error. So watch our other video series. There we talk in detail about the validation.
Warnings won't hold us back, right? So we
Yeah,
push forward.
exactly. We have to look for the warnings. If it's nothing that's really
Yeah.
matter, we go on. Errors are another story. So
Mhm.
we are now able to form a new cluster with the PowerShell commandlet new cluster. We give it the nodes. We have a variable here with the 4 nodes. We
Mhm.
have the cluster name here,
Mhm.
tow car cluster. And here's a speciality. We give it two cluster IPs. We talked
Mhm.
about that. We have different IP addresses in both management networks. And just let us just run this command
Mhm.
and cross our fingers.
Mhm.
And maybe we have to speed this a little bit up.
Mhm. So while this is happening, maybe we talk a little bit about your domain structure, right? Because I recall that there is some documentation out which says, and you may switch to my screen and I can show you this, where this is, because there is some documentation on stretch clustering and how you set it up with PowerShell, for example. And here under the prerequisites, so before you begin, it tells you something about your Active Directory,
Mhm,
which requires you to set up two sites. Um,
mhm.
yes, you can do that. And if you have your nodes separated in the two sites, that's good. However, it works also without doing it, right, Carsten?
Mhm. Yeah, I think Microsoft is referring to we called it metro cluster or country cluster setup,
So the
where
London,
you have
Paris,
different
yeah.
IP address spaces in the two sites,
Mhm.
also for your virtual machines. In my scenario, we told you this is a very small campus cluster. The machines are not really in two different sites. We handle them then they are in two as if they are in two different sites, but they are nearly together. And so my Active Directory is also in the same network. It's not in one of those two management networks we created for our cluster, but it's in another management network where our domain controllers live, and they have the same they are in the same subnet.
Mhm.
And I implemented already multiple Azure Stack HCI stretched clusters by the book, how we teach you that here. And I had never to put sites in the Active Directory. Yeah, we either the cluster will recognize itself that it has two different management networks and will create
Mhm.
the nodes in different fault domains, so in different sites, or we will do that with PowerShell afterwards. But
Mhm.
to decide what to do, our cluster has to be formed, and then we can have a look. And
Okay. Yeah. So let's have a look at your PowerShell output. So in the ideal world, it would, everything would be picked up by the setup or by the failover cluster setup itself. And it will detect that it is in the two sites. So let's see if that happens here as well.
so now our
Uh,
cluster is created. Let's get
okay.
a cluster. Yeah, and yeah, we're fine. We have to do one additional thing because we have a stretch cluster, Bernhard, right?
Yes, so, but I think this is going to be in the next video where we do some housekeeping stuff, which is, we look at the cluster from the failover cluster manager, for example, to see the networks, to maybe clean some things up and also create the witness. But I think you are referring to the fault domains to tell the
Exactly.
cluster in
Yeah.
which site the individual nodes are.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we let's just have a look if the cluster have created something on its own.
Mhm.
If we
Yes,
do that. Oh,
sometimes,
it has.
okay. And it already put yes, so that's good. That's, I would say, how it usually or normally it should look like, right? So the if you create a cluster with separate networks, sometimes it picks it up, or it picks it up.
It
In
should
our
pick
case,
it up. So if
it
it
should pick it
doesn't,
up.
you have to create them on your own.
Hmm.
And we had prepared something in the
Yeah.
script we were doing, and here we
Hmm.
have uh, two new fault domains, level site, even and odd, and I think we will also do that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
should we go with this? What do you think?
Um, Yeah, maybe yeah, let's create them, right?
We
Because
do that.
for the people that are not fine where the stuff doesn't happen, then it's okay to do it manually, and in order to and then shift the individual nodes around, right?
I do that. So
Hmm.
we have here.
Hmm.
So we create two new fault domains, new
Hmm.
cluster fault domain. Fault domain type is site in this
Hmm.
example. So we have different rooms or different sites.
Hmm.
And we called our site even and odd, you remember maybe.
Yeah.
And then we set the cluster fault domain of the different nodes to the even or odd side. So node 1 and
Hmm.
3 is set to the odd side, and 2 and 4 to the even side. And
Hmm.
if we do the get cluster fault domain again,
Hmm.
you see now we have still our two IP management IP address sites, but now we
Hmm.
have an even side and an odd side. And
Hmm.
also our nodes are assigned to one of those sites. I think
Hmm.
this is a bit clearer than the IP addresses, but it would work with the IP addresses.
Right, and it's an important step to be done at this stage of the cluster, right? So remember, we don't have the storage added yet to the cluster,
Yes,
and that's important because how the way how the storage will be, put into the cluster is different if there is an existing site structure or not, right?
exactly.
Um,
So
and yeah, I think that was an easy step. If you want to learn more about the different fault domains, what is possible there, then there is documentation out on the internet regarding this, right? But for our stretched cluster, We use the fault domain type site, right? And
Okay.
not rack or chassis, for example. Right?
So see you in the next video, I would say.
Yes.